Peachtree, Georgia. He is the Ministry Officer Relations for the Southeast from the Presbyterian Foundation. They fund a lot of good research and work and guidance. They don't give us money, but they give us expertise who walks along with us. And so Robert has flown down just for us, for tonight, to give us a very precious 3 hours where we will work on stewardship and related matters. And he has a terrific presentation. There will be lots of links and resources afterward. And Sherry and I also met with him on Zoom prior, and she sent him all the budgets for the years and the annual meeting minutes and all the things that he would need to know to get to know our church. So he will present best practices, what's going on these days, not your parents' offering plate, right? But it's also tailored to us as Siesta Key Chapel in 2023, preparing 2024, which is quite the gift. So I'd like to open us in prayer. Gracious Lord, we thank you. We thank you for folks that come and walk alongside us as we strive to be wise and courageous and to do your work. Give us energy and joy and enthusiasm to look forward to the financial health and the mission and well-being of Siesta Key Chapel to do your work in the world. Thank you for bringing us Robert. Give us ears to hear. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen.
Thank you. Well, it's good to be here with you this evening. I spend a fair amount of time in this part of the world. I cover a 5-state region: Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, and I also cover Puerto Rico. But my in-laws have a home just a little bit north on the next key up. What's that one? Longboat Key? So actually during the pandemic, when the world shut down, my wife and I and our kids, we came and camped out up there for about 2 months because we were all working remotely. So I love being down in this part of the world. So thank you for having me. I'm what's called your ministry relations officer with the Presbyterian Foundation. I'm a ruling elder. So I know I've got session in here. So how many of you are ruling elders? Good. All right. Then I've got some finance committee folks too. Finance folks. All right. Okay. Good. So I'm a ruling elder. I've been with the foundation about 12 years now. Before that, I was the CFO of a couple different nonprofits in Atlanta before joining the foundation. But my father is a Presbyterian pastor. My grandfather was a Presbyterian pastor. My great-grandfather was a Presbyterian pastor. It's 4 greats. Great-grandfather and all the way down have been Presbyterian pastors, and I got out of it by marrying one. My wife, Morgan, Reverend Morgan Hay, she serves as the pastor at First Presbyterian Church in Peachtree City, which is where we live. Peachtree City's a little community just south of Atlanta. And we live there with our 2 children. I have a 9th grade son and a 7th grade daughter, and I've just realized that I don't have much time left with them anymore. So I thought it might never come to an end, and now it seems like it's coming faster than I thought. So that's a little bit about me. Let me tell you a little bit about the foundation and who we are. This is, I love this graphic because it kind of shows us the structure of the denomination. And I love that it shows the sessions at the top. Because the session, the church is actually, it's the missional spear. It's the tip of the spear, in my opinion. This is where church happens, is here. And so all of these other things, I believe we support you. That's what we do. And so we've got Presbyterian. We've got some Presbyterian folks in the room. So what presbytery are we in? Do you know what the name of your presbytery is? East River. Fantastic. And then, do you know what synod you're in? South Atlantic, yes. And do you know what states that includes? Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. That's right, yes. So that's the Senate, right? And then the other thing I really like about this graphic is that it shows that General Assembly, which is that meeting that happens every 2 years, it's like Congress meeting that happens every 2 years. That's not made up of people like me. That's made up like people like you. See, we send those people from presbyteries to serve at General Assembly. So has anybody ever been to General Assembly? And Carson, Milana, what's your name? Pete. All right, good. So if you ever have any questions about General Assembly, Pete is your man. He can answer all your questions about General Assembly. And then the 6 things on the bottom, these are what known as the 6 agencies of the church. And this is the staff that work for you. And we all work for you through direction given to us by the General Assembly. And so you can see the 6 there, the Office of the General Assembly, that's our polity arm. That's where the stated clerk resides. That's what keeps us decently in an order, right? The mission agency, you're familiar with the mission agency. They do things like World Mission, World Hunger. In this part of the world, you're familiar with Presbyterian Disaster Assistance. That all comes out of the mission agency. Presbyterian Investment and Loan Program. This is the mortgage company for the denomination. So they give mortgages to churches. Presbyterian Publishing Corporation provides curriculum. The new hymnal came out of the Publishing Corporation. The Church Foundation, that's me, so we'll talk about me in a minute. And then the Board of Pensions, that's our HR arm, if you think about it. That's where you get your medical benefits for your pastor and the pension, et cetera, for your staff. So those are the 6 agencies. The Presbyterian Foundation, we're the oldest faith-based foundation in the U.S. We've been serving Presbyterians just like you since 1799, and our job is to attract, acquire, and manage assets for the kingdom. And we do that in a couple of ways. One main way that we do that is helping with stewardship. So that's what we're going to spend most of tonight talking about. And when we talk about stewardship, we talk about annual stewardship, which is going to be the majority of our focus this evening. But we also help with planned giving and Will's emphasis, and I'm going to spend some time near the end of the evening talking about that as well. So that's kind of the stewardship. It's helping you fund this church. So it's not fundraising for the denomination, it's helping you fund for the church, for this church. And then, of course, the other big thing that we do is investments and endowment management. So making sure that you've got good best practices in investments, good policies, and then, of course, we've got investment vehicles available through us. We may touch on that when we talk about planned giving a little bit later, but that's really not our focus this evening. Our focus this evening is stewardship. Questions about structure or who we are and what we do? I love my job because my job is to help. That's it. I'm just supposed to go out and help churches. So I love doing that, and one of the great benefits of being a PCUSA congregation is that you get these resources just for being a PCUSA congregation. There's not a lot of denominations that offer these type of services. So, all right, okay. Well, let's dive right into to this. So, if you'll join me in this prayer. In life and death, we belong to God. Through the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit, we trust in the one triune God, the Holy One of Israel, whom alone we worship and serve. We trust in God alone, who loves us and enriches us with abundant gifts. And so we will seek to move in attitude from scarcity to abundance, in lifestyle from consumption to renewal, and in finance from debt to freedom. We worship God alone, who empowers us to celebrate the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ. And so we will seek to move in liturgy from avoidance to celebration, in giving from funding to offering, in emphasis from annual to year-round. We serve God alone, who calls us to a life of thanksgiving to the Spirit, loving God, neighbor, and self. And so we will seek to move in practice from maintenance to mission, in outreach from parochial to global, in relationships from domination to interdependence, in gratitude what I'd like to start with. Scarcity to abundance. I think that's a key component of what we're going to talk about the rest of tonight. You see, for too long, what we've done in the church when we've talked about stewardship is we have said, woe is us, we don't have enough. We don't have enough. We can't possibly do what we need to do. Please give more. We don't have enough. And that's not a compelling invitation. Hey, give to us. We don't have enough. And two, it's just not true. I believe in a God of abundance. God has given us more than we need. And we should be celebrating and moving away from this place of scarcity, of not having enough, and moving into this culture of abundance. Look at all that we have. Look at all that we've been given by the Lord. And look how we are making a difference in the lives of the people in this church, in this community, and in the world. That, to me, is kind of the essence of the shift that we need to make in stewardship. So what is stewardship? So Jesus said this, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's kind of that concept maybe that the place we invest our time, our talent, and our treasure maybe is an indicator of what's really important to us. Cliff Christopher, who's an author who wrote a book, Not Your Parents' Offering Plate, gets a little more direct with this and says, maybe what Jesus is telling us is the closest thing to our heart is our wallet. I think what Jesus is trying to remind us is that we invest in the places that are important to us. I like this idea about stewardship being the antidote to the idols of our age. You know, this concept that maybe if I give, if I return to God, maybe it will heal me of this sickness of consumerism. I like that idea. I think that's a good description of stewardship. But for me, stewardship is this part, the bottom. It's a joyous discipline of giving thanks to God. Joyful discipline. When do you ever hear those words together? Joy and discipline. We don't hear them together very often. I have a hard time describing a joyful discipline because most disciplines don't bring joy. But my cousin, he's an ultra marathoner. Does anybody know what an ultra marathon is?
More than 26.2 miles.
Yes, but she was accurate. She said it's crazy. But you're also accurate. But yes, technically an ultra marathon is anything longer than a marathon. But most commonly they're 100-mile races. And they take 23, 24, 28 hours to run these races. And my cousin Doug, he runs these ultra marathons, and then he blogs about it, and somehow he makes a living doing that. I'm not sure how he does that. But clearly, I was not given the gift of a runner's body. That's like, I'm not a runner. But Doug tells me that runners achieve this thing called a runner's high. It's this euphoric moment where mind, body, and spirit just come clicking along while running. But that runner's high doesn't come in that first jog or even that second one. It comes after maybe even years of the discipline, the practice of running. That's about as close as I can come to describing what a joyful discipline might be like. See, for me, yes?
You might know that Pat Oker, our stewardship chair, is a marathoner.
There we go.
I saw that. Of course, joy is in discipline.
That's right.
Of course.
So you're preaching to the
There we go.
choir here.
Good. So Pat can tell us all about runner's high. I've done a half marathon at Disney World, so I finished it. That's what the important part is. did it once, so that's good. But for me, the discipline part of stewardship was really important when I was young. So my parents, they taught me to give first. And so when my wife and I got married, that was what we did. The first money that went out of our bank account each month after we got our paycheck was to the church. We gave first. And that was hard. We were young, married couple, trying to keep up with the Joneses, and we were having to make decisions. And the discipline of giving was important. But a funny thing happened as we kept that discipline up. We began to find that we really enjoyed giving. We found great joy in it. And so for me, that tension of a joyful discipline is really what stewardship is. That's what it is for me. Giving thanks to God, sharing joyfully, because God loves a cheerful giver. That's what stewardship is for me. Here's some other words about stewardship. Certainly about gratitude, giving thanks. Thanksgiving. We're coming up on Thanksgiving. To me, that's what Thanksgiving is all about, is giving thanks and returning, saying thank you. It's about your spiritual journey, too. That's not to say that giving more means you're more spiritual. But the way we give of our time, talent, and treasure, it certainly shows what's important to us and how we can walk along our spiritual path. It's about making choices for sure. It's about time, talent, and treasure. What's the third word? Time, talent, and treasure? What's the third word? Time, talent, and treasure.
Treasure.
And too many people I've worked with believe that's an or. And that it's time, talent, or treasure. And I believe God doesn't want just the piece of me that I'm willing to give. God wants a relationship with all of me. And so I believe part of what stewardship is educating about that. And this is certainly about disciple making. So what is stewardship not? Let's see if this sounds familiar to you. Maybe the elder who misses the spring session meeting gets designated as the stewardship chair for the upcoming year. Kat, was that you?
I see your point.
Typically then the stewardship chair, writes a letter. Maybe there's a Sunday where we talk about it. Then maybe we hand out pledge cards. And then we receive pledge cards. Does this sound familiar? Have any of you done this?
Yeah.
Yes, I think you're in the midst of this right now, right? Well, that is not stewardship. That's an annual fund campaign. That's an important part of stewardship. But if that's all you're doing in stewardship, you're missing the broader piece of stewardship. We have to do that piece. So I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying we need to take a broader view of what stewardship is. That really is an important piece of stewardship, but not the only piece of stewardship. Stewardship is not about money, and certainly not about fundraising. If it were about fundraising, we would have some different tactics. But nonprofits have figured out how to fundraise. So that's one of the things that has happened over the last 40 years. So 40 years ago, the church got over 65% of all charitable dollars went to the church. Today, the church gets about a third, about 30% of all charitable dollars. Now, people haven't stopped giving. What's happened is a couple of things. One, the nonprofit sector has exploded in the last 40 years. And while it has exploded, it is professionalized in fundraising. And so, in some ways, in many ways, 40 years ago, there was no competition for charitable dollars. And today, there's more competition than we know what to do with. So, stewardship is not fundraising like the nonprofit does, but they have figured out how to do it really well. And so we do have some things to learn from them. And we'll talk about them as we go through the rest of this evening. We have to take them and bring them into a church context and kind of massage them a little bit. It's not about meeting a budget. That's kind of back to the scarcity mindset, right? If what we're doing in our stewardship communications is saying, oh, we've got to meet these expenses, that's that scarcity mindset. We want to move to that abundance mindset, right? And then it's not about us either. It's not about us as individuals either, as stewardship committee members or as a pastor or as a congregation. Stewardship should be about inviting people into the story and asking them to be a part of it. So what I'd like you to do now, if you will, around your tables, for a few moments, is to, maybe the third if you can get there, spend a few minutes. Who taught you about stewardship? What's your first memory of stewardship? And why is giving to the church important to you? So why don't we take maybe 5 minutes for you to do that? I want to share with you my first memory of stewardship. When my dad went to seminary when I was very young, and so his first call was to be the associate pastor at First Presbyterian Church in Selma, Alabama, which I can slip into that accent really quick if you would like. And I was in first grade when we moved to Selma, Alabama. My mom wanted to sing in the choir. But my brother was young enough that he could go to the nursery during worship, but I was too old to go to the nursery. But the senior pastor's wife, Mrs. Betty Waters, offered to sit with me in church so that my mom could sing in the choir, which was very kind of her. And Mrs. Betty Waters was that wonderful kind of grandmother type person to me. So I loved the opportunity to sit with her. That first Sunday I sat with her, she leaned over early in the service, and she gave me 2 $1 bills. She said, if you behave, you could keep one of these. The other one you could put in the offering plate. Well, I was 1 year old. I mean, first grade. I didn't have much concept of money, and really didn't have any concept of what offering was. And so the plate came by, and she kind of pointed at it, and I stuck a $1 bill in, and put that other one in my pocket, and tried to behave as much as a squirmy first grader could in church. So this went on for 3 or 4 Sundays in a row, and then one Sunday we were leaving church, as the pastor's family, we were like the last ones to leave, and we're walking through the parking lot, and my dad says to me, well, how are you enjoying sitting with Mrs. Waters? And I said, well, I love it. She gives me money. My dad was just more what? She gives me these $2 bills, and I put one in the offering plate, and if I behave, I get to keep the other one. And my dad said, no, Robert, you can't take money from Mrs. Waters in church. And so he made me gather up the few dollars I had collected, and the next Sunday I gave them all back to her. And I'm sure my dad had talked to her as well about it at some point. So I learned a couple of things through that. So coming up that next Sunday, she leaned over and she said, well, I know I can't give you money to keep, but here, put this in the offering plate. So then she started to give me $1 each week that just went straight into the offering plate. And that was how we continued for as long as I sat with her. And so what I learned through this later in life, kind of reflecting back, is one, you shouldn't expect to get paid to behave in church. That's not something you should expect. That just behaving in church is what should be expected of you. Two, I started out with this concept of tithing that was a 50% tithe, right? I got $2 and had to give one away. And then later, it was 100% tithe, where I had $1 and it all went in. And I was just ecstatic later in life when I found out that it was a 10% tithe. So, yeah.
You gave it back to the woman, not to the church.
No, to the church.
I thought you said you gave it to the woman.
I gave the ones that I collected back to her, but then each Sunday going forward, she would still give me $1 to put in the plate. And so, you know, I was just ecstatic to learn that a tithe was 10%. I thought, well, that's easy.
Yeah.
That's better than 50%, certainly better than 100%. So these are core memories of stewardship when we learn when we're young. So I hope, as you were talking around your tables, you maybe had a couple of moments of memory of who taught you about stewardship and why it's important to you. What I would ask you to do is in the coming weeks, reflect on this a little bit more. Reflect on these questions a little bit more. And if you're willing, if you're up to it, maybe take out a piece of paper at some point in the next few weeks and sit down and maybe write what you believe about stewardship, what your theology of stewardship is, your personal theology of stewardship, why you give. You don't have to be anything long, just maybe jot down some notes. And then maybe after you've done your personal theology of stewardship, maybe take another couple minutes and see if you can write out what you think the theology of stewardship is of this church. See if there's any differences, or maybe see if there's some similarities, maybe see if there's some things that you can help the church shift on, or maybe there's some things the church needs to help you shift on in your theology or understanding of stewardship. But I want you to do this exercise because being leaders in the congregation, I don't think we can be leaders of stewardship until we understand stewardship for ourselves. This is one of those things that we maybe learn from the nonprofits. Nonprofits ask for 100% participation from their board members, and that's because they know that their board members can't be effective fundraisers if they haven't actually put skin in the game themselves and have a good understanding of it. So I'm kind of asking you to do the same thing. Try and understand why you give, what your theology of it is, so that then you can be a leader in the congregation. All right, so this is from a study of why people give to any charity. I'm using church language because we're in a church, but this is the 3 reasons why people give, the motivations of why they give to an organization. Number 1, they believe in the mission of the organization. Number 2, they believe that the organization is being fiscally responsible. And number 3, they have a relationship with the leadership. We have the best mission of any nonprofit. So we should have number 1 checked off. There are churches that have not so good past history in number 2. So sometimes you have to work a little bit harder to rebuild that trust. I don't get that's the impression here. I get the impression that the people have a good understanding of finances here. And so I don't get that impression, but most churches are okay in number 2 unless they have something that's happened in their past. And number 3 is an interesting one. And we'll talk more specifically about what that means. But people want to be invited by their leaders. And so how do we make that happen in a church setting? So these are the 3 ways we're going to respond to those. We got to tell this story. And if you hear nothing else from me tonight, I want you to hear that telling your story is the number 1 thing you can do to make stewardship better. I will probably say it another dozen times tonight. You've got to tell your story. You've got to be intentional about it, and then let's find ways to strengthen relationships. Apologize. I had a little bronchitis last week, and it's still lingering. All right, so how are we going to do this? We're going to talk about 3 different kind of roles in the church. So now we're getting to kind of some of the practical piece of this. So, number one recommendation I have for you is to create what I call a generosity team, which is a separate standing committee of the session. Not the finance committee, not a stewardship committee that only works for one season, but a generosity team or generosity committee that is a standing committee that has people who serve over a 3-year period. And this needs to be different than your finance team. And that's for a couple of reasons. Oftentimes in churches, the finance committee has been responsible for stewardship, right? And I know we've got some finance folks that were invited tonight because of that. But really, if you catch the philosophy here, which is storytelling, this generosity team is going to be responsible for the storytelling. And so, who do you have on your finance team? You normally have bankers, CPAs, finance folks, investment folks, people who've run a business, really good with numbers, right?
That's our church.
That's right. So who do we want on the generosity team? We want marketing folks, communications folks. Ideally, we would want somebody kind of representing each program area of the church. That's for a really practical reason. There's plenty of work for the finance team to do. Finance team is plenty busy managing cash flow, managing investments, managing budgets, right? And that's where their skill set is, strength. What we're looking for, the cheerleaders who love to excite people about things. That's who we want on the generosity team. The fundraisers. We're looking for people who have maybe been out in the nonprofit sector who have done this. People who've worked in a marketing department or a communications department. Event planners. People who enjoy bringing people together. People who can maybe think through, who are task-oriented, who can think through, okay, these are the tasks we got to get done, and let's go get it done, right? And what I've typically found is people who are really good in the finance skill set typically are not blessed with the marketing skill set. And the opposite is true. People who are really good in marketing and communications typically are not blessed in finance and accounting, right? It's a right brain, left brain thing. It's not that one's better than the other, it's just different gifts. Many parts of the body, right? So I hope you'll start thinking about who are the kind of people who could be on this? Who are the kind of people who could do this type of work? And one of the keys here is they're going to work year-round. So yes, they're going to coordinate that annual campaign, that annual pledge campaign. But what we're really going to move towards is a place where you are telling the story of this church all year round. Doesn't mean you're asking for money all year round. It means you're telling the story of the church all year round, right? Yes, sir.
Does this apply to a church like Siesta Key where your majority of your members are seasonal?
Well, you still
It's a
meet
very
year round.
different congregation where you have the majority of your congregation showing up for 6 months.
Right.
And the remainder of the year, they're gone, they've got another church.
Well, it does, because what we want to do is in that 6 months when they're here, we want to make sure they're hearing the story.
But they're not gonna work year round.
And then the 6 months when they're not here, we also want to make sure they're hearing the story through other communications. So just because they went back to Michigan or wherever they're from, we don't want them to not know what's happening at Siesta Key.
To get them to work here while they're there, I don't think is a reasonable assumption.
I think with technology and Zoom, we can do a lot of committee work remotely these days. Yeah.
Would you say, Robert, kind of on that point, I remember hearing once in a workshop that perhaps it's even more important for a seasonal church because it tethers people who are gone for the season with what's happening at the church. And a lot of our churches, I know my church that I'm from has a really difficult time doing that. When people
Right.
go away, they're kind of gone. So would you say that something like this would be even more beneficial?
It could,
in that
absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're talking about keeping that connection and communication, right? Yeah, absolutely.
So I just want to observe on the seasonality, it's kind of like two different perspectives, because I feel, Bob, you're talking about the committee members that have to do the work.
Yeah.
And it is a challenge here in Sarasota.
Right,
I'm
because
involved on various
Majority of
nonprofits.
the people
A
that
lot of
attorneys
people
leave.
aren't here all year round, and so it does affect committee work. But that's something, I guess, from your perspective, for us, as a challenge for us to think about how to, there's a whole thing around how do you get the committee to be engaged more year
Right.
round.
But that would also
But that's
be the
separate
case for any committee you have, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you-
not
you-
just this one, any
Right.
of them. But that's a separate point from how do we maintain year-round communications?
Correct.
Because
Two
even,
different elements.
they're two different animals, right?
Right, yes, yeah. It's certainly a challenge, but it's a challenge worth
Well,
tackling.
it's not as simple as you lay out here for us, because we have that split.
Right,
If you've got somebody all year, yeah, it works.
but that's the challenge you have in every committee here at this church, right? I mean, and the church doesn't stop working for 6 months when people leave. So that's a challenge that the session probably needs to work through on how you have committee structures that function 12 months out of the year, even if half the members aren't here. during that.
Well, because most of our current session members are here year-round, which means we're disproportionately.
But I would think this would be not just Florida,
Right.
people go away. I'm
Right.
sure people in
In Georgia,
Georgia.
instead of it being 6 months and 6 months, it's 9 months and 3 months.
Right.
We lose people in
In
the summer.
Pennsylvania, I know that the church in Pennsylvania, after school lets out until September, it's a different schedule.
Right.
Right,
You don't have choir, you don't have
Right.
all that stuff in the summer.
right. I think the key point here is we want to tell our story as much as we can, not just for the 3 weeks that you're telling the story right now, which is what you're doing right now. You're doing stewardship for
Right,
3
right.
weeks.
Right.
So whether that's 6 months or 12 months or 8 months, we want to tell the story more often than you're telling it now. I think if that helps with that takeaway for year round. So what does that look like to coordinate storytelling and asking? So I was part of a church that several years ago on the second Sunday in September. The first Sunday in September was Labor Day, so nobody was there. But the second Sunday in September, they had a member of the youth group stand up, and he said, "Hey, we're doing this mission trip next summer. It was a great, wonderful. You've heard these over the years. Somebody stand up in church and say, hey, we're doing something that we need you to give money." And so this youth was standing up and saying, "Hey, we're doing this mission trip next summer. We need every family in the congregation to pledge $100 so that we can go on this mission trip." So that was the second Sunday in September. And then the third Sunday in September, they had the executive director of the local co-op that the church was a part of. The co-op provided services for homeless. The executive director came and gave a minute for mission, and she said, it's so wonderful how this church supports us. You support us out of your mission budget. Thank you. So it was a wonderful, thank you kind of minute for mission. But then she kind of finished her thank you by saying, but you as individuals could give directly to us as well. So that was the third Sunday in September. And the fourth Sunday in September, a member of the Earth Care Creation team stood up to give a minute for mission. And they said, look at these lights and these ceiling tiles. We've received a grant to replace all of these things so that we can make the building more green friendly. It's a matching grant, so in order for us to get it, we need every family in the congregation to pledge $100 to it. So that was the fourth Sunday in September. The fifth Sunday in September is one of those Septembers where there were 5 Sundays. A member of the Race for Grace committee stood up, and said, you know, we do this 5K, 10K race every year. It's a fundraiser for our missions. We need each, you know, everyone in the congregation, you know, if you've got employers who want to be sponsors of the t-shirts or whatever, you know, please, you know, sign them up. And oh, by the way, to reach our fundraising goal, we need each family to give $100. So that was 4 Sundays in September. And then we rolled into October. And October was stewardship season. And so we then talked about asking and asking and asking and asking and asking again at stewardship. So it was 8 Sundays in a row where we were asking for money.
How much of the congregation did you lose?
That's right, yes. I heard the comment, I feel like I'm an ATM when I come to church. Now, all 4 of those asks that happened in September were important. They were vital missions and ministries of the congregation. They should have happened. They just should not have happened back to back to back to back right before the annual campaign. So, that is an example of a church that was not coordinating the asks. So what we're going to ask this generosity team to do is to not only coordinate the storytelling, but coordinate all the asking. What's that look like? Well, that looks like if there's something that needs to be asked for, that's got to go to the generosity team. And the generosity team's got to be empowered to say, okay, you want to do that special ask? We have a slot on the calendar that fits for you, and to schedule it. So the session's going to have to empower the generosity team to do that. The pastor's also going to have to empower the generosity team to do that, because I know at least one of those 4 asks that happened in that church happened because right before worship, the person went up to the pastor and said, "Can I make an announcement?" And the pastor said, "Sure." So your pastor is also going to have to learn to say, "No, you can't make that announcement today. That needs to go to the generosity team, and the generosity team will find a slot for you." So that's the part of coordinating the asking, thanking, and storytelling. Does that make sense what we're talking about here?
Comment on that.
Yeah.
My hometown in Pennsylvania, we have what's called a capital campaign review committee, which all capital campaigns that are happening in the town go through that committee. And they have a schedule, and it was actually coordinated through United Way and all
Right.
that, so that all these campaigns didn't overlap.
Right.
Well, we've come to the point now where, okay, there were several people that were exempt, the college, the hospital, that kind of thing, that were exempt, and then you become a roadblock to everything happening.
Right.
And we changed our mission to best practices versus you have to come to us before you can do it. So
That's what I'm asking.
So we actually went through that a couple of years ago. People were coming in the office and telling the administrator, "Oh, I need this in the bulletin," and it'd be right at print time. And, you know, there's no way to send it to mission, send it to where. And so all these different minute for X, and then one day there were 3 different ones, and they were all confusing. So then we went through, it all goes through the pastor so that I can help the calendar spread out so we have sense. Love to have a group that looks at the big picture and says, this is when they'll be able to hear this best because of what's around it. And I can work with them.
Right. Yep.
Yes.
And not only coordinating the asking, but the storytelling. You know, and so we'll talk more about
the part is not to become a roadblock for those organizations.
that. That is correct.
But a helpful plan.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the generosity team, and we'll talk more about what storytelling looks like as we go. But let's talk about the session's role here. So session, you've got to sanction and charter the generosity team. You've got to get them up. You've got to get your nominating committee nominating people to be on it. You've got to recruit good people. You've got to empower them and let them do their work. But I think as session members, you've also got to be willing to share your story, your personal stories. And you're the leaders of the congregation, and so be willing to share what your story is and share that with the generosity team and offer to the generosity team that you're willing to share your story. Now remember the point about creating authentic relationships with the leaders. I really love this pray for church members. Now I'm sure you pray, right? You probably have a prayer list. Do you have a prayer list? Do you have some prayer process, right? I'm going to suggest something slightly different. I'd encourage you to take your church membership and divide it by however many session meetings you have a year, which I believe would be one a month, right?
Summer, we take a
Right.
couple of months.
Okay, so 10, 9. Take it, divide it, send a letter out to 1/9 of your membership and say, at the February session meeting, which is on this date and time, we will be praying for you by name. Is there anything, if there's anything that you would like for us to particularly pray for, please share it with a member of session or with the pastor. Now, I know you've got an open prayer list, and anyone can submit a prayer request at any time, right? But there's something about receiving a letter that is directed to you that says, "Dear Robert, we're going to pray for you at this date and time." You will be amazed at the notes you get from folks back saying, "Thank you for praying for me. This is actually what's going on in my life." And then I would encourage you at that session meeting to do that. Do exactly what you said you were going to do. Pray for each of those people on that list by name. Pray for whatever they shared with you to pray. And what you're doing here is you're creating some intimacy, if you will, between church members and session. People want to be in relationship with the leaders of the church. And by building that through prayer, this act of prayer, you're building a stronger relationship with folks. And we started with prayer tonight. That all this should be centered around prayer anyways. And it will be a wonderful way to begin to start each session meeting, is to pray individually for members of your congregation. So I really love this piece.
What do you recommend as channels?
Sorry?
What do you recommend as channels?
Channels to communicate that?
Yes.
Email or a physical letter?
Physical letter costs money.
Okay.
And email, I can tell you, most women I know of don't look at email, they look at text.
Then I would suggest do both. Send a text if that's the way.
That is another channel that we as a congregation need to look at, because we probably cover mail and we cover email, we do not cover text.
So communicate whatever channel fits for each person to invite, to let them know that you will
We
be
need
praying for
to
them.
regularly review channels, because channels have evolved.
That's right. Yep. All right, this is one that we also have learned from the nonprofits. All right, how many of you have ever served on a nonprofit board? Good. So those of you who've served on a nonprofit board, you probably remember being recruited. Somebody probably called you, maybe invited you out to coffee. They sat you down, they said, "These are the wonderful things about this nonprofit." They then lay out the expectations for being a board member oftentimes, and those expectations are so many board meetings that you need to attend, likely so many fundraising events that you need to attend, and if they're doing good nonprofit board recruitment well, they finish with one of the most important pieces, which is, "And we expect you to give." And they will do it in one of three ways. They will say, "We expect you to give," and they'll tell you exactly how much. Or they will say, we expect you to give or get that amount as a fundraiser. Or sometimes they may just say, "We expect you to give something personally significant," just kind of that last thing. But they never miss the opportunity to set that expectation that as a board member, you give. And I mentioned a few minutes ago, one of the reasons why we do that, nonprofit boards need 100% participation in their giving. So they can go after grant money and things like that. But they also know that if you don't have skin in the game, you can't go and be an effective fundraiser. So we're taking the same concept from the nonprofits. I believe to be on session, you've got to be a giver. Now, the devil's in the details here, right? How does your nominating committee nominate people? Well, I think there's a way for this to happen. Your nominating committee can put a slate together. It can shift that slate to whoever in the office knows who gives. That person can say, scratch these people off. And then you can nominate. I think there's a pastoral exception here. I believe if there are people who have shown the gifts and the interest of serving and that type of leadership, and maybe they haven't grown up in the church, maybe they don't understand the expectation of stewardship, maybe they're financially in a place where they can't give. Any of those reasons, this could be an opportunity for the pastor to make an exception and say, I'm going to put my arm around this person and we're going to have this kind of conversation about their leadership. But I would say that the rule of thumb here would be you shouldn't be leading this session, shouldn't be a member of session unless you're a giver.
That's your primary thing, you can't get the DEI.
Okay? It's not your primary thing, it's just one of the things.
Well, if you're saying you can't, if you're not a giver, you can't participate. You're not going to get the DEI.
Okay?
I think that's why he said you have a pastoral exception.
Okay. Well, it's important that
That's-
that be mentioned because
Yeah,
a lot of us here are of that persuaded.
Good, thank you. And then this last point, you've all got pledge cards sitting in front of you. I think this is important too. When it's time to pledge and give, you've got to pledge and give first. And again, I don't think you can be a leader in this arena if you aren't leading in that way. All right, that's session. So what's your pastor's role? Your pastor, I think she's doing a fantastic job already in some of that. So this really is just to give you an overview of what best practice might be and for you to realize that your pastor's already doing it. But I think your pastor should talk about their own stewardship. I think that, again, I'm Presbyterian to the core. I understand our polity, that we're not pastor-led congregations. We're ruling elders and teaching elders, and there's some parity in that. I also know the realization is people sit in pews and look up at a pastor. And they want to be invited and challenged and thanked by their pastor. And I think your pastor needs to lean into that. And I think they want to have an authentic relationship with their pastor. And I think one way that you can have an authentic relationship as pastors is to talk about your own stewardship. I think the more we talk about money, the more we take the power away from money. And so if your pastor can talk about money, it takes that secrecy and power away from it. Jesus talked about money more than anything else. At least that's what the Bible says. So that may not be the case, but it's the thing that's written more in the Bible. Is that Jesus talked more about money than anything else. So this is where I think your pastor can follow Jesus' lead there. Preach about generosity, telling your story, be the chief storyteller, invite and ask, and say thank you. And so your pastor's already doing this, so I don't need to spend a lot of time here. I do want to spend a few moments on this concept, just so that you can understand some of this as well. Your pastor knows who gives, and that's best practice. But let me give you 3 reasons why it's best practice for a pastor to know who gives. One is this really practical reason. As the leader, the executive director, if you will, the executive director of an organization needs to know who's given and how they give so that they can appropriately ask and invite and appropriately thank. So that's just a really practical reason. I don't think that's enough of a reason for a pastor to know in a church, but it's just the practical piece of it. But the spiritual piece, I think, here is important as well. If we go back to what we talked about at the beginning, that the way we give is an indicator of maybe where we are on our spiritual journey. Again, that's not to say that those who give more are more spiritual. That's not what I'm saying. But at least the way we give is an indicator of where we might be on our spiritual journey. If we see our pastor as shepherd of this flock along its spiritual journey, this is an important piece of information that helps your pastor shepherd you along your spiritual path. So that's the spiritual piece. But the pastoral piece is really the piece that gets it for me. If someone who is always given $100 a week drops a $20,000 check in the offering plate, what does that mean? Could be something really good. Could be something really bad. It could have just hit the lottery. That could be good. Could have just gotten an inheritance, which could be good or bad. It could have just gotten a terminal diagnosis. And the inverse is true. Somebody who consistently gives, stops giving, it could be an indicator of something. Maybe they lost their job. Maybe they've got family that is sick. Something might be happening in their life. So the way someone gives is signaling something, whether they know it or not. And so changes in giving patterns may be signaling a pastoral care need. And that's an important part of what your pastor does, is provide pastoral care. And so without that knowledge, your pastor cannot provide that information. So that's why we say best practices for your pastor to know, and I'm glad that you all know that your pastor knows, but that's why. So good. All right, let's jump into the story piece. So I talked a little bit about what is your story. What is your story? What are you known for here? Anyone? What are you known for?
Well, right now, our beach service.
Your beach service? So reaching out to the community on the beach? Mm-hmm.
That we're a chapel instead of a certain denomination on the key. This is, I see so many Catholics, people who, Episcopalians or any sort come because it's not blazingly Presbyterian.
Good. Yeah. So you're welcoming of all
Yes.
Christians?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What else? What else are you known for?
Maybe, I don't know how well we're known for it, but I know that it's important to us as a congregation, is our commitment to mission. So
Mission.
we tithe.
Right.
So 10% of all of our contributions, we give back to the community, and that, I think, has been a really important part of this church from its beginning. I think we're also known for and important to us for the beauty of our surroundings and the distinctiveness of the experience of coming here. When you walk into our sanctuary,
It's like nothing else.
it doesn't, it's not
Yes.
like any,
Yes.
it's not like any other sanctuary. So when people come here, they have this experience. Now, getting people outside of the church to know that that exists isn't always the easiest thing, but that experience of the first time walking in the sanctuary
Yeah.
is really tremendous.
Yeah.
And it's part of what we want people to feel good about. It's just, it is a sanctuary and a place where you can be comfortable, right?
Yeah.
Feel connected.
Good. What else? What else are you known for? What would be missing if this church wasn't here? What would the community miss? Or what would you miss if this church wasn't here? feel out what your story is.
That's a really good I would miss it. I think Ray would miss not being able to walk to service, right?
Sense of family.
Family.
Belonging.
Family and belonging, right?
Community church.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Family.
I think people initially, and I had a membership, but they feel very welcome here. They think
Right.
we're a very friendly congregation.
Right?
And they enjoy being with us.
Yeah. Welcoming and friendly.
And not formal.
Not formal, so relaxed.
Just
Right.
relaxed, yeah. Well, trying to be.
Right. I love this question, how are you being the hands and feet of Christ? I love that kind of imagery. I think that's what we're called to be. And maybe your mission work kind of lines up with answering some of that. Maybe even your beach service lines up with being the hands and feet of Christ, kind of leaving this place and serving over there is, I love that idea. If I were teaching an organizational theory class, what we would be doing is we would be coming up with what your mission is. And we would be trying to identify the one or maybe two things that you were going to be known for. And then you would, as an organization, you would go and you would measure everything against that. And if it was supporting that one or two things, you would keep doing it. If it was not supporting those one or two things, it would fall off, right? That's just, if you look around at successful for-profits and nonprofits, they have figured out the one or two things they're good at, and they lean into that with everything, right? Amazon, right? They get you their stuff fast, right? They're good at it. Right, so that's what we would be doing. And so ideally, you would be centering your stories around those things. And you named it all of them. Mission, friendliness, the experience of worship, family, location maybe even, so stories don't have to be billboard-worthy, tearjerker stories. They just need to be authentic stories. So, and the best stories are first-person stories. So back when I was talking about session, you sharing your story, the best stories are first-person, where you maybe just get up and worship and take 2 minutes just to answer the question, why do you come to Siesta Key Chapel? That's a real story. Or why did you first come? Or why do you keep coming? Or try and answer that question. Where do you see Siesta Key being the hands and feet of Christ, right? You just need to hear people celebrating what you do well, what you're known for, right? So this isn't rocket science. It's really more finding someone who's willing to just share their first-person story. Now, some of those stories can be as simple as answering that question, why are you here? Others could be a story of someone saying, let me tell you what we did at this mission activity. And finishing with a thank you. So one of the most effective ones I saw was a Sunday school teacher stood up one Sunday, and she said, I've been teaching Sunday school here for 42 years, and you all know little Johnny, and everyone knew who little Johnny was. He was the little hellion that would run around in front of church. And she said, last Sunday, at the end of Sunday school, little Johnny came up to me and said, Mrs. Smith, I know Jesus loves me, and gave me a hug on his way out the door to big church. Thank you for supporting Christian education. That was it. Not even 2 minutes. She didn't ask people to give money. She said thank you, and told a real story of how that church was doing Christian education. She didn't ask, but that thank you sure was an ask, wasn't it? And that's what I want you to take away. Is your stories should be, let me tell you what we do, thank you for doing it. By the time that you get to this time of the year where you're handing out pledge cards, now you're inviting people into something that they're excited about. They know why you're asking. Does that make sense what the stories should look like? So that's, back when we look at that generosity team needs to be made up of folks who can kind of see stories like that. Where they can hear, they can see someone in the congregation and go, you know what, I bet they've got a great story that can be shared. So that's who you need on the generosity team, is people who kind of have that lean, if you will. They kind of see the world as this great place where good things are happening, and they want to tell everyone, right? Does that make sense with stories? It's what we're looking for with stories. So what are some other ways we can do that? So we talked about minute for mission. You're all familiar with minute for mission, right? Somebody stands up and does that. I think that's exactly what we're looking for, is that someone who stands up and gives that first person or that third person perspective. Now, here's what I would tell you to do. I would encourage you, anytime you ask somebody to do a minute for mission, you give them a word count and you make them write it. Because even the most well-intentioned person will get up there with a mic and they may just make one shift in what they thought they were going to say, and it won't be as effective. But if you can get them to write it and then take a little bit of editing privilege with it, and make sure that it follows that sequence of, let me tell you what we're doing, and finishes with a thank you. But give them a word count, maybe 100 words per minute, so maybe give them 300 words, and that'll get you 3 or 4 minutes of somebody talking. But that'll help kind of make sure the message is hitting what we want it to do. Let the generosity team kind of help craft that, if you will. If you have I know you have the ability, I saw your technology, Barry showed me it all. I would encourage you to record those. Clip them out of your recording. Put them on your website. Put them on your Facebook page. This isn't just about stewardship. This is evangelism. People don't walk in this church without having first visited your website. And what better way to get people to come here than for them to see real people here telling the real stories of this church. And if they can click on a video and see 3 or 4 different people telling those stories, that will invite people in. So this isn't just a stewardship exercise. Are you passing an offering plate anymore? Mm-hmm. I would suggest that person talk while the offering plate's moving. Unless you've got some special music that's happening, let it happen while the plate's going around the room, so that doesn't feel like such a somber moment in the service. Let's have a story. I would encourage you to have those same stories printed in your newsletter. So if somebody's going to write it as a first person thing they say, they can also write it as a short newsletter article. Or if someone doesn't feel comfortable standing up in church, maybe you've got someone who's willing to tell their story, but not willing to stand in church and tell it. So let them write it. Let that be the cover article in the newsletter. You can push your pastor's article a couple pages back. But let that be there. Make sure there's a picture, right? I really love these Vision Sundays opportunities. You've got this great space, you've got that great space outside here, a sanctuary. Bringing people together, kind of in a more informal gathering, and laying the vision for next year and telling the stories of what you're planning for next year in an uplifting way, can be very, very helpful.
Can I ask you a
Yeah.
question about that? So, because I'm not familiar, that's not something that we've done, right, Vision Sunday. Is that in lieu of this service? Is it outside the service?
That would be after the service,
After
probably.
the service, yeah.
Mhm.
I like that.
Yeah.
And a 6-month checkup.
Yeah. Dessert and dialogue. This is a really helpful tool for having those tough conversations. There's going to be times where it can't all be Pollyannic happy communications. There's going to be a time where you're going to have a conversation about you're not meeting the budget, or maybe the latest hurricane came through and blew something away, and you've got to make tough decisions, right? There's going to be times that you're, as a congregation, you're going to have tough conversations. I would encourage you not to have those in the sanctuary, and instead have those conversations in what we're calling dessert dialogues. Have those conversations in homes, around living room tables, around dining room tables. Have 7 or 8 of them. Let people sign up to attend them. Have session members host them, and then get around the table and say, "Hey, we're family. Let's share some dessert, but we're family. We've got this tough thing happening, and we need to talk with you about it and hear from you as the congregation, as we as the session are trying to navigate this." I think moving away from someone standing up front and talking down at a congregation about some difficult issue is really better. So if you can move it into kind of living rooms. That can also be a great way if you want to move to some way to do a big challenge. If you're going to do a big fundraising or stewardship challenge and ask people to really increase their giving, you could do that in that same format. And so then that conversation maybe would be a little more happy, but it would be happy with a challenge, right? I've talked about testimonials and video testimonials already, and then I'd like to talk about narrative budgets, and then we'll take a break for dinner. Does that work? All right. So let's see what a narrative budget is. I'm going to stop talking, but then it's going to be me again on a video.
One of the main reasons that people give to an organization is because they believe in the mission of the organization. Successful nonprofits are really good at telling their story and showing how they are accomplishing their mission. In the church, we are often not very good at this. We typically send out a line item budget once a year and then ask people to pledge to it for the next year. A line item budget doesn't tell your story. It doesn't show how your church is accomplishing its mission. Most church members don't even look at the line item budget, and the ones who do look at it for all the wrong reasons. Why is the pastor's cell phone bill so high? Doesn't the pastor know that Verizon is running a friends and family deal right now? And if the pastor will just go change his cell phone plan, then we can balance the budget and save stewardship. Sound familiar? Now you need a line item budget. Your finance committee, your session, and your church staff need it. It is an important tool for managing the business of the church. However, your line item budget is not a storytelling tool. It is not something that should be used to either encourage or threaten your church members into giving. Instead, you should consider using a narrative or missional budget. A narrative budget is a storytelling tool. A narrative budget shows how your church is doing mission and ministry and what it costs to provide that mission and ministry. A narrative budget tells the story of how your church is being the hands and feet of Christ in your community and in the world. So how do you make a narrative budget? The first step is to identify the mission and ministry areas of your church. Ideally, you'll be able to connect your ministry areas back to your mission statement. The goal is to identify the areas of ministry that your church focuses on. For example, worship, Christian education, outreach to the community, fellowship, mission, and pastoral care. Once you have identified your ministry areas, the next step is to allocate every line item in your budget or every expense that your church has to one of the ministry areas. You will have to make some assumptions about some expenses, and you should document those assumptions. For example, about what percentage of your pastor's time is spent on worship and worship planning versus pastoral care. Some of the line items will be easier to allocate. like the expenses associated with your organist. Those can be allocated 100% to worship. Your building expenses will be a little more difficult. Think about what percentage of the time the building is used for worship, Christian education, ministry to the community, the preschool, and so on. Now, this is more of an art than a science, but the goal is to have your entire line item budget allocated to ministry areas. Personnel in building and administration are not ministry areas. They are functional expenses of ministry areas. Every line item under personnel and building and administration should be allocated to ministry areas. Once you've allocated every line item expense to a ministry area, you should have a total cost for each area. Your next step is to write a narrative summary about each ministry area. Celebrate in written form what your church does in each area. Talk about how your church does worship or how your church does outreach to the community and the impact it has. Take this opportunity to celebrate how you are being the hands and feet of Christ. And remember, this is a storytelling tool, but this story should not be a novel. Short and sweet will have a much bigger impact on people. Finally, take your ministry areas, the narrative you have written about each area, and the total cost of each area, and put them together in a brochure format. Visual images are one of the best storytelling tools we have, so make sure you include lots of pictures. If you hand people a document with no pictures, most people will read the first 2 sentences and the last sentence and then put it down. But if you hand people a brochure with lots of pictures, most people will read every word and spend time looking at every picture. The finishing touches to the document are important as well. You can use a simple trifold format and print it in-house, or you can have a multi-page booklet on high-gloss paper that you send to a professional print company. Do what fits your context and church, but don't make it look cheap. This should be a brochure, available in print and online, that catches people's eyes and inspires and energizes people about your church. A well-crafted narrative budget is a wonderful tool for celebrating the mission and ministries of your church, and for connecting those ministries to the dollars you ask people to tithe to the church. We have examples of narrative budgets on our website, and your regional ministry relations officer would be happy to help you and your congregation with creating a narrative budget for your own church.
All right, so make sense? I've got some examples. So, and while we're eating dinner, feel free to come and look at these. But I want to hold them up for you so you can see them. So, I worked with a church that did exactly this. They documented their assumptions. So, kind of their first page was how many hours the pastor spent in each of these areas, and then on the inside they had worship, pastoral care, Christian nurture, and outreach to the community. Those were their 4 ministry areas with a narrative written about them and the amount. They were missing a couple things. There's no pictures. Pictures are really important. And this was the first year that this church did this, and the treasurer just couldn't get over it. And so they put the line item budget on the back. So don't do that. I really like this one. You can tell I've had these for several years. They're all kind of tattered. But I didn't mention earlier that I went to Auburn. Anyone know anything about Auburn? And there's this other school in Alabama that we at Auburn don't really like. So this is the church in Tuscaloosa, or Tuscaloosa as we Auburn folks say. And this was put together by one of my really good friends. And this was their first attempt at this. Now, this is a really big church, and the budget's almost $2 million, so don't let the budget amount scare you off. But they had this theme, because you give. And so in each section they said, because you give, and then they wrote why, and there's pictures. And really good. You imagine that this was on really nice paper and opened like this, right? Really good. They missed the mark, though, on one big thing. Their 3 biggest ministry areas were buildings and grounds, personnel, and administration. So those 3 areas, although those were the 3 largest functional expenses in the church, those 3 areas should have been allocated into their other areas, which were things like worship and arts, and campus ministry, and the mission committee, and family connection, etc. Right? But I really loved the look and feel of this. They were almost there in it. what's wonderful is the pastors put that together just a few years later. She then took a call at First Presbyterian Church in Auburn. She was saved and moved to Auburn. And this was her first attempt at the narrative budget there, and I really love this look and feel, and she got it right that time. Got the ministry areas: worship, studies, stewardship, outreach, fellowship, and UKirk. And you can see lots of pictures, really simple look and feel. People read every word of this, right? This is one my church did several years ago. Our church had gone through a mission study and come up with a new mission statement. And our mission statement included 3 main components: joyous worship, authentic relationships, loving outreach. So those were our 3 ministry areas, right? So, and then this is a church actually not too far from here. This is almost a decade old though now. This is from 2014, I think. This is Venice Presbyterian Church. And you can see this. This looks and feels like a nonprofit annual report. Really nice, high gloss, lots of pages, lots of big words, lots of pictures. You can see it's falling apart because I've been using it for years. But what I really appreciate of this is, they've got their area, care and compassion, they've got their narrative, they've got their pictures, they've got the dollar amount for that area. But then in the bottom corner, they did a pie chart of the functional expenses for that area. It doesn't have percentages, it doesn't have dollar amounts on it, it just is a pie chart showing that care and compassion, which they spent $180,000 on, was broken down into program, personnel, operations, and building and admin. I kind of like that connection for people who still want to see that functional piece, but we're not focusing on it. We're still focusing more on the big piece. And then this is one that I just picked up at a church, and there's no dollars. There's no dollars listed on this. That's an interesting take. I would encourage them to put some dollars, but this is really well done and looks well. What I know about this church is they do a really good job of communicating what the budget is year-round anyways. So they didn't really need to do it when they got to here. But I think any of these formats, particularly the ones that I was saying were better. This is a wonderful storytelling tool, and this is a place where your finance committee and your generosity team will have to work together. Because your finance team is going to make the budget. Your generosity team is then going to need to allocate that budget to the ministry areas to kind of develop this piece. So, makes sense on what this is and why we use this? What we're really trying to do is connect that when you give dollars to the church, those dollars are going to ministry. We don't want to talk about those dollars going to pay the light bill and pay for the building. They are. That's where they're going. But they're going there in order to enable you to do ministry. So we want to talk about it from a ministry perspective. Good? All right, I'm going to leave these here if anybody wants to look at them. Any instructions for dinner?
Sure. We'll be going through a 2-sided buffet. Try to mix up who you're sitting with, not at the same table that you're here, so you can have a new conversation. I believe you'll be open for question and answer during dinner, and then we'll
come back after dinner. So give everybody a little bit of time to eat, and then we'll come back and finish this, and then talk about Thanksgiving. So, thank you.
Do you remember the last handwritten note you received? The handwritten note used to be the way people communicated. Today, we use email, text messages, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. I will admit that even as a fairly tech-savvy Gen Xer, I'm not exactly sure how to use Snapchat. We send email blasts that are chock full of information, and we send short text messages with acronyms and poor grammar. We have websites with calendars and electronic forms for people to complete, and we have photos and videos galore available for our members and potential members to view online. Today, we have more ways to communicate with our flock than we have ever had before. But is something missing in all of this communication? In my experience, people get engaged with churches where they feel like they have real and authentic connection. Certainly, we are in the business of building relationships with Jesus Christ, And one of the ways we do that is to build authentic relationships within our church community. We have fellowship gatherings and prayer groups, and maybe even dinner groups that help to build connections. But how do we build them through our communication? With handwritten notes. With all of the technologically advanced communications available to us, I think the best way to build authenticity is to go back to the simple handwritten note. The handwritten note tells the recipient that you care enough about them to slow down your busy day long enough to write them about how much you appreciate them. Several years ago, a church I'm familiar with called a new pastor. The new pastor started in October, just in time for the annual Stewardship campaign. As pledge cards began to come in, the new pastor wrote handwritten thank you notes to each person who turned in a pledge card. And wouldn't you know it, she received thank you notes for the thank you notes. She had church members who came to her and expressed that they had never been thanked by their church or their pastor. This pastor, through handwritten thank you notes, started authentic relationships with her church members. Here's a practical way that you can achieve sending a handwritten note to everyone in your congregation. Take your church roll and divide it by 52 weeks in a year and write that many notes a week. The most appropriate topic for the note would be simply to say thank you to them. Thank them for singing in the choir. Thank them for ushering. Thank them for leading a Sunday school class. Thank them for their financial giving. Thank them for their leadership role in the congregation. And if you can't come up with something to thank them for, then thank them for being a part of the church. Order thank you notes with church logo on them. Ask your administrative staff to address the envelopes and put them on your desk each week. The notes do not need to be long. Keep it short and simple. 2 or 3 sentences will do. Another way to build connections between church members and the church leadership is to take your church roll and divide it by 12 months in a year and send a letter to your church members explaining that at the upcoming session meeting, the session will be praying specifically for them and their family by name. Invite the church members to let the pastor or a member of session know if there's anything that they could pray for specifically. This personal invitation for a prayer request will build an authentic relationship of trust between church members and church leaders. Expressing thanks to church members for the ways they are part of your church through a simple handwritten note will build a stronger relationship between you and them. This stronger relationship will lead to many more opportunities for spiritual growth and engagement. And church members give more generously of their time, talent, and treasure to churches where they are growing spiritually and where they have authentic relationships with the leadership. Asking people to give is very important, but saying thank you is even more powerful.
So here's just some practical things. We've talked about these already, and I know that your pastor already does this. Your pastor's already really good at writing thank you notes. But I think your session could start writing thank you notes. This is, again, something we've learned from nonprofit boards. Oftentimes, if you've sat on a nonprofit board, you may show up at a board meeting and there might be a list of people you're responsible for saying thank you to. I think if you're on session and you're the fellowship chair, maybe you should be writing thank you notes to the people who helped put the fellowship event on. Or if you're the worship chair, maybe you write thank you notes to people who helped usher or run the AV or set communion, right? So I think this can be a part of your job on session that will raise stewardship as well. And then, of course, the generosity team can work on this as well with the pledge cards and financial giving. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to come back to this in just a minute because we're going to talk about this separately. What I really want you to focus on, this is kind of the secular fundraising cycle. You identify, you cultivate, you solicit, and you recognize. And then you do this over and over and over. This is what nonprofit fundraisers do. This is why we're trying to embrace this year-round approach, right? So in the church, we want to do this on an ongoing basis. We're kind of always doing this, kind of always doing each step of this, and we're going to do that with storytelling. So how do you do it? This is going to sound really elementary, but just make a calendar. I've served on enough church committees and been around churches long enough to know that oftentimes what happens is we show up at a committee meeting, we have a whole bunch of great ideas. We go away from the committee meeting, we come back a month later and we say, who did something? And no one did anything, right? Because we just didn't have a plan. So I think a simple calendar can kind of be your task plan for your generosity team, with a goal of trying to tell a story every month. And back to the point of the different channels. Tell it in worship, tell it in your electronic newsletter, tell it on your website, tell it on your Facebook page. Make sure it gets out in all of your marketing communication channels. And you'll build these things onto that calendar. I'm rushing because I want to get to planned giving, but I want you to see a couple more resources that are available for you. This is a website I would encourage all of you to visit, and I should have handed this out to everyone earlier. This is kind of an outline of what we've talked about. It's got the links on it for what we're doing. But the Stewardship Navigator, if you haven't visited this, each one of you can sign up for this, and it basically is a online toolbox. It's got a sample calendar on it. It's got a narrative budget builder. It's got sample letters and sample brochures. This is your online toolbox and free resource that's provided by the Presbyterian Foundation. So really practical tool here for you. So I encourage you all to check that out. The other resource I would encourage you to check out is the Church Financial Leadership Academy. This was funded by a Lilly grant that we received at the Presbyterian Foundation. And these two videos I've shown you are two of the videos that are in the library on the Church Financial Leadership Academy. We've got, I don't know how many videos are up there now, maybe 85 or 90 videos on a variety of topics. Everything from, stewardship to budgeting to investing to, so this would be a good resource not just for your stewardship team but for your finance team. And they're, as you've seen, the two that I've shown you, they're short 4 or 5 minute videos that we talk about them as being like TED Talk videos, kind of quick to the point, videos that are easy to consume. So this is a free resource for you. Yeah.
Quick question. I'm sure you're aware of Charity Navigator. Are churches evaluated in that, and they look at Lutheran churches?
They are not. Churches typically are exempt from filing what's known as a 990 form, right? And so Charity Navigator oftentimes starts with that and then goes that way. You will sometimes find churches listed on Charity Navigator, but it's not a core piece of what they do. Yeah. But it is a great place to go and do your due diligence on other nonprofits. Yeah. All right. So just here's some keys to success for annual stewardship. Be inviting. Celebrate. I mean, we're trying to change the tone here, right? We're moving from scarcity to abundance, right? Look at all that we do have. Look at what we're doing. Let's tell that story, right? But challenge. It's also challenging. Invite people to be a part of the excitement that you've got going on. Here's some more things to do. I think certainly as you look at next fall, I would encourage you to spend between now and next fall thinking about a narrative budget, seeing if that's something you can put together for next year. I would encourage you to create that generosity team. See if you can get that going, so maybe first quarter of next year, so that you've got 6, 8, 9 months of work as you head into next fall. And say thank you a lot.
I'll say that Karen today, our administrator, was listening to all the stewardship going around. She got on the website, created a button on the front page, stewardship pledge, press it, takes you right there. Fill it out. I did a test. The card is filled in and submitted online.
Yeah, make it easy.
Print, make it easy.
Make it easy.
So if you try it, let Karen know, if there's any tweaks you think. It was she just did it.
So what are my don'ts here? Don't do it by yourself. It can't be all on your pastor. It can't be all on your stewardship chair. you need a team. So get a team, and don't be afraid to spend some money. You know, if it looks like you cut corners and put together something that was cheap, then people are going to assume that about the church. Instead, that's all our communications. Let's try and make them top notch and nice looking. This is an interesting one that I didn't talk about. Don't use a one letter fits all. So as you are doing some communications, it may be that you want to segment out your congregation. So maybe think about that as you go into next year. And what I find to be most effective to segment out in churches is maybe a couple of categories of the way people give. So maybe what you want is people who don't give. They should get a letter that's different than the people who are giving at a very high level, right? The people who are giving at a very high level probably should get a letter that is, thank you so much for your faithful giving. We cannot do this without you, and inviting them to continue giving. So people who don't give, people who give at a high level, maybe draw some other segments, maybe people who are giving at what we at the foundation would, we talk about modest giving. Modest giving would be, $1,000 a year or less. So people who are giving at a modest level, and then what we also know is the most common gift in churches is about $5,000 a year. So maybe people who are in that $1,000 to $5,000 or $6,000 range, and then people who are in that $6,000 to $15,000 range. So you could segment out, and then your letter, that stewardship letter that you send out, could look different. And if you think about that, my dad and I both went to Auburn, and we get two different letters, right? My dad's, 30 years older than me, so the letter that my dad gets asking to make a gift looks different than the letter I get, right? So they know that we're different people and we're at different stages in life. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about maybe segmenting out your communications.
We just took our first shot at that by doing a stewardship letter to the congregation,
Right.
and another one and friends,
Right.
and a different version to the beach.
To the beach service.
ministry.
That's right. Yeah. And then another way that I've seen churches in Florida do this is having a communication that is to year-round residents and seasonal residents, right? And particularly if you're doing some communication in the off-season, that communication to those people who you know are not here but are back wherever they live that half of the year. You don't want to send a letter to the people who are here, or a communication or a newsletter that says, we miss you, when you're actually here, right? But you do want to send the we miss you letter to people who are not here, right? So think about that in your communication. The way you communicate to people makes a difference.
I'm thinking in this modern world too, we also have people that are virtual.
Right.
And we have in the sanctuary.
That's another segmentation would be if you're able to communicate just to the people who join you virtually, you want to communicate to them different than the people who are sitting in the pews every week. Yeah.
You mentioned giving online.
Right.
My children are in their 20s and 30s. They don't carry money. They don't have a checkbook. And they're probably not going to give online, but if you have a text way for them to give while they're in church, then they'll text you some money. But I think we're still kind of catching up with that idea.
Right.
Like we do text to give at the beach.
Right.
We found that there are beach folks
That will do that, right.
who didn't do it in the chapel.
Yeah.
Because they like to put it in a place that, there's not one answer, but we did find.
Yeah. Yeah, back to make it easy, let people give the way they want to give, in other words. So, yeah. And you already do online giving and text giving, so you're ahead of the curve on that with some respect. And then this last one, this one's really tempting, and you may even actually do this, and I don't know it, but it's not helpful to put in the bulletin, last week's offering and last week's expenses.
We don't do that.
So don't do that. That's not helpful because it tells a story that you may not want to tell, right? So anytime you do share financial information with the congregation, make sure there's a narrative with it, because numbers alone are telling a story that need to be interpreted, and so make sure you've got a narrative written with it. So these are your resources. All right, I'm gonna stop here for a minute and see what questions you have about annual giving before I run us through planned giving really quick, recognizing we got about 30 minutes left. So, annual stewardship, what questions, reactions? Or I explained it all and you know it all and just move on?
No, I think everything, I think what you've been saying is tremendous. And it's really helpful. The challenge for us is getting that generosity team together. But
Right.
I like the mindset that you're bringing to all of this. And as you've been talking, I'm on the board of a not-for-profit that does everything that you say.
Right.
I was just at the annual reception last Sunday, which was about nothing but thanking people, where have we been, where are we going? But I've never really think about that mindset with respect to being here.
Right. Yeah.
So it's really helpful.
Yeah. Well, I think you've been, at least it's my understanding, maybe the history here over the last 4 or 5 years, you've been working towards this shift, right? I think your pastor has been making moves into this, right? And been working towards saying thank you and preaching about generosity. And I mean, you've noticed that, right? You've seen Ruth leading that way. So I think you're headed in the right direction, right? So now I think what you just said is most important. Your next big task is to get that generosity team going, to partner with Ruth to really take you to the next level on that. Yeah.
Our particular church had we were in a synod that we had a number of our churches supported a high school. That was parochial high school, and they would have people like such as yourself come around and shake the bushes a little bit and see what they can come up with. And so one time the presenter was done and everybody was giving what they could give. And I went up to the presenter and I said, well, what was it that you were hoping for? And he never said that. It was just give what you think is good. And so the answer was, we really wanted $400 to $500 per family
Right.
for the school. And so I wrote them a check for what they want. And on my own, I probably would have written a check for $100, $200.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And so that's, we're talking a lot about, give with a happy face.
Right.
And from both directions, but I think we need to focus on letting people really know, how to be constructive about giving.
Yeah, I think if you can tell the story about the exciting things you're doing and then challenge people by saying, we want you to be a part of this, and in order to be a part of this, we need to get to here. We need to get to this level, right? I think that's the way you can do that. I heard a pastor once who I respect deeply in stewardship, and he said, you made me think of this with your smile comment. He said, I used to tell people they should give until it hurts. He said, but really we should give until it feels good, right? And that might mean going past the hurt, like pushing through the hurt, right? And that's that joyful giving piece, right? So, but if people don't know what you need, they don't know how to get to that. So, good, thank you.
I think it's important because when Sherry said, and I know Milana has said that Sesiki Chapel gives what we can, and the percentage to the presbytery, etc. I think it's important that we stress that it's 10% of our contributions.
Right.
And if we don't make it, that affects our missions.
Right.
And I really don't think people get that. I don't think they get that.
Well, I think one way to kind of hit that home is to celebrate those missions. So tell the stories of those missions and say, look what we're able to do. And then to have that piece of, because you give faithfully, we're able to give 10% of everything that is given here goes to support these missions.
So Pete is our mission chair right here, and last year we had a mission fair, and then we had, 2 months of Sundays where we had a Minute for Mission. We invited every group that we're involved in to come up, short video,
Right.
tell about it, and then meet outside afterward to have conversation.
Right. Yep.
I don't know that I could translate that to giving to us, but it did make them know about more tangibly is who it is that we're.
Where we can remind people
Yeah.
about the level of giving that we're doing back to the community and how important it is to how we see ourselves as a church, and that allows us to provide this.
Holding the event on the deck is very much more important than having it out there.
Right.
Because some people will not make that walk.
Oh, from there to here, that's
Yeah.
right.
And they just go to the car.
Yep.
Yep.
And it was the longest after service mission fair that we've ever had. Because people stay up there and talk, and then they talk to each other, and they talk to our representatives from the mission agencies.
It makes it very real. It makes it very direct when you can connect right with
They're
the
real stories from real people.
Right.
Plus, we now have Girl Scouts who come and sell Girl Scout cookies during these events.
All right, well, I'm going to shift, and I'm going to run through how to run an effective planned giving program in a church. So we've been talking about annual stewardship, and your generosity team is going to own that when you get that set up. Planned giving is the 200 level topic, right? Like this is the next step. But I think you can start working on that next year as well. Like we could get a smaller group going. So let me get that presentation up. Let's see. So one of the things we talk about in planned giving is that we like to use language about leaving a legacy and leaving your faith legacy is really the language we like to use when talking with church members. You all have gotten the communications from your alma mater and from the Cancer Society and all the places, right, that are asking you to leave an estate gift. I think most, I can wrap this thing up in 30 seconds. Most good church members would be happy to leave something to their church. Their church has just never asked, right?
I agree with you 1,000%.
Right. So this whole thing, planned giving, is really just about figuring out how to effectively ask and communicate. There's my family. Leaving a legacy for my family is about more than money and possessions. It's about making sure they know that we are beloved children of God. So let's see. All right. So in endowments and planned giving, there's really kind of 3 legs to the legacy stool. There's how do we spend it, how do we manage it, and how do we grow it. So oftentimes what happens in churches is you get a legacy gift at some point and you started an endowment. You have one. You have an endowment. And you spend most of your time as a church either doing number 1 or number 2. And what gets forgotten is number 3 here. How do we grow that, right?
Have a whole bunch of days like today.
That's right. Yeah.
Stock market.
That's right. Yeah. So I'm going to briefly hit the first 2, and then we'll spend the most time on the third one. If you were starting from scratch, recognizing that you're not, because you have an endowment already, but if you were starting from scratch, we would encourage you to create an endowment that has 3 main purposes: building or capital, ministry, and mission. That's for a couple of reasons. One, you know people in this church who the facilities are really important to. And then you know other people in this church who, what's most important is the mission we do. And then you know other people who go, no, what's most important are those ministries that we do, right? Typically 3 distinct people. And so if you only had a single purpose in your endowment, you might miss out on some people's motivations, right? Sometimes people who care a lot about mission don't want a dime going to the building, and vice versa, right? So that's the reason for these 3 purposes. Another reason is most churches will always have those 3 things. There will always be place, there will always be ministry, and there will always be mission. It's just kind of core to who we are as a church. And then another reason to have multiple purposes in your endowment is what we know about people who leave legacy gifts is that they want to designate. And if you have not created a way for them to designate, they will create their own designation. And then you will end up with the Robert Piano Fund and the Sally Music Fund and the Janice Organ Fund, and, right? And you end up with a whole bunch of named funds for specific things because people want to designate. But if you can define some things, it allows people to give directly to it. So this is what we would encourage you to kind of build as a best practice. Recognizing you've already got something in place, what we would encourage as you kind of embark on this going forward is to maybe think about how you can take what you have now and either add these to it or supplement, and then begin to promote these purposes kind of going forward. Best practice as well is to utilize a total return spending formula on your investment. So a total return spending formula would say, instead of just taking the earnings on the investment and kicking off, the earnings, you use a formula and you look back 12 quarters in the account balance. How do you do it now? Do you know?
We just do
We're already
4%
there.
of a moving 12-quarter average.
Okay, so you're doing that.
So what I think you're suggesting here is doing based on your actual income.
No, I'm suggesting doing it under market. Yeah, okay, so you're doing this, all right, good, okay. All right, so I'm gonna skip this. So managing the legacy fund, who does it? Oftentimes you either will have your finance committee doing it or an endowment committee. You need to make sure you've got an investment policy. An investment policy would say what your asset allocation is, et cetera. I see some of the heads. Okay, so good. So you have done what I said most churches do, focused on number 1 and number 2, and it sounds like you're doing number 1 and number 2 well. So let's talk about number 3. Number 3, growing the legacy funds. Yes, we can grow them through the stock market today, but the fastest way to grow an endowment is through new gifts. You can double, triple, or quadruple your endowment with one gift. The right one gift, right? But, and really, this is just through communication and making people aware. I call this the drip, drip, drip method. That's 12-4-2-1. So what you want to do is you want to create a simple brochure. And when I was unpacking earlier, I realized I didn't bring my example brochure, but I will email one to you. But the simple brochure, really simple. Maybe a donor story, an invitation from the pastor, maybe a description of your funds, the things people can give to, capital, ministry, mission. I think you've got a Mance one, like a list of them. And then maybe a description of what a legacy society is. So a legacy society would be anyone who has let the church know that they have left a legacy style gift to the church. They're in the legacy society. Any amount. Amount is not important. As long as they have let the church know that they have done this, they're in the legacy society. What's the easiest way to find that out?
Yeah.
Put it on this thing. Put it on your annual pledge card. Put a little check box that says, we have remembered Siesta Key in our estate plans. Let them check it. I would actually suggest 2 check boxes. One that says we have done this, another that says we would like more information on how to remember Siesta Key. When you get these, they go on the Legacy Society. What's the Legacy Society do? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to celebrate those people annually. We're going to say thank you to them while they are alive. Because what I know about the way people give estate gifts is it's not good enough to get in their plans, but you have to stay in them. And oftentimes what happens is you would have a big push in a church, and some people might go change things, and then you never talk about it again, and 10 years go down the road, and somebody has been invited by their alma mater to give, and they say, well, the church hasn't asked me in a while, maybe I'll just scratch the church out and leave it all to the college, right? So it's not good enough to get in, you have to stay in their estate plans. So what we're going to do is annually, we're going to have a Legacy Sunday. On that Sunday, your pastor can preach on legacy. There's lots of good Bible stories about legacy. And then in your bulletin, I would encourage you to list all of your Legacy Society members saying thank you to them. Now, there's no levels in the Legacy Society. There's no gold, bronze, silver, platinum, because amount doesn't matter. List people alphabetically. And then when somebody does pass away and joins the church triumphant, put a little asterisk or a little cross by their name to signify that they have joined the church triumphant.
But they stay on the list.
They stay in the Legacy Society even if a gift never comes. Even if a gift never comes. We hope a gift will come. But so we're not really tracking this against a gift, right? We're tracking this against intent. And so what we want to do is while they're alive, we want to recognize and say thank you over and over and over. And we want to reassure them that their legacy will continue when they're gone. So by doing that, we're reassuring them. And what this does is this gets us away from the named designated funds, which is a way people have wanted their name to stick around. You know, the Robert Piano Fund, right? Instead, Robert left a legacy, and Robert will just be in the Legacy Society with everybody else, right?
So I'm going to connect the dot here, and then I think that in our narrative budget, we can then say in the narrative budget, here's the support into the budget from
That's
the
coming
Legacy
from the
Society
endowment.
this year, which turns it into
Right.
feeling like a really positive
Yes.
thing, an intended thing.
Right.
You know, it's sort of, here's the contributions we're all making on a regular basis, now here's what we're, from what we've
That's
gotten
right.
from people in the past, they're still with us,
Yep.
right? So they represent this percentage of our budget, and I like that.
Yep, absolutely.
I really like that idea.
So Robert, I do a lot of pre-funeral planning with families, and it's a way to get to know them, especially if one spouse is starting down the road, and it offers opportunity for pastoral care and counseling and all that. And I'm thinking, Mike, the reason I brought this up and was so, let's talk about this, is I'd like to be able to include this opportunity as
Right.
they're thinking about how will my spouse or myself be remembered?
Yeah.
Thoughts about putting those together?
Yeah, put the brochure you put together in your funeral planning packet that you may provide, and have that conversation while you're doing funeral planning. Have you considered leaving a legacy, your faith legacy here to the church? Here's a brochure. Here's a little commitment card where you can let us know that you've done this. Yeah, absolutely. I think those go well together. All right, so let me talk through the 12. Oh, so that Legacy Sunday will celebrate during worship. And then the other key to the Legacy Sunday is the Legacy Society event. And it is a thank you event, just like you were describing from your nonprofit board. Either on that same Sunday, actually I did it pre-pandemic. I keep saying pre-pandemic, it feels forever ago. But pre-pandemic, a church actually in this presbytery did this, and they did it on the Monday morning after, and it was a brunch. That's what worked with their congregation. That may be something that works here as well. But find a time around the Legacy Sunday where you can have the society members come together, have a little meal, maybe have a musician from the choir or somebody's, a trio from the choir sing while people are eating. Just a little entertainment. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, just some entertainment while people are eating. And then finish after that with someone from the generosity team or the endowment team telling the story of what the endowment did this year. Not the financial report, but because of the endowment, we were able to do this, this, and this, and then finish with a thank you. And do that every year. And it will become an event that people want to go to. It will become a social event that people want to be a part of. So your society members will get an invitation to it. It, of course, will then be open to the entire congregation to attend. Kind of as a thank you to those that are in the society and almost a recruiting tool to the rest of the congregation, right?
Could you just clarify for us, somebody wants to give to the endowment versus, I'd like to leave money so the church can go fix the things that need fixing right now, and how would you change the opportunities?
Yeah, so what we're really looking for here is what we would talk about as a planned gift or a legacy gift.
Right, but if they want in there, like, I know I've got 12 days and only X amount of time left,
Right.
and I would like to know that in the next few years,
Right.
we're gonna actually do the thing,
Right.
right? As opposed to it goes in the endowment and a percentage over time.
Right. I think it becomes a one-on-one conversation, and certainly don't turn down money if it is a gift and the use of it is something that lines up with what the church actually needs, right? But the promotion of this, the congregational wide invitation is to leave a gift to the endowment, right?
So when we say remember the church in your will, we are generally talking about the endowment.
Right. In those purposes of the
Right.
endowment.
But if someone has a will and it said like $1,000 to the church,
Right.
we figure it out.
Yes, and then I would suggest by policy that any undesignated bequest gifts go to the endowment.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
And we could decide, you could set up a policy on an undesignated gift to allocate it among the 3 funds.
That's
or
exactly
We
right.
could decide where our needs are greatest, right? It all depends on you.
Yeah.
But it
This-
should be part of that. If it's an undesignated gift, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the sample policy that I would share with you if you wanted one does exactly what you just said. It, by policy, would designate to, a percentage to each one of the funds.
But the fewer restrictions, the better.
Yes.
Right.
Because then over time, you lose track of what the intended purpose was and
And it's not what the church necessarily needs.
needs,
anymore.
right, and.
All right, so let me walk through the 12.421.
Oh,
Sure.
that's it, well, you're just, never mind.
So 12.421.
Yeah.
Once a month, put something in your bulletin. It could be as easy as, have you remembered Siesta Key in your estate plan? See our brochure for more. It could be that simple. But once a month, get something in your bulletin. Once a quarter, get something in the newsletter. Twice a year, have an in-person live announcement, and once a year, do that Legacy Sunday. So let me give you some examples. So this is example bulletin blurbs, right? The gift of a lifetime here, something a little bit longer or something really simple. Newsletter articles, what do those look like? I think there's kind of 3 different newsletter articles that you could do. One would be a first-person testimonial, just like we talked about with annual stewardship. One of you who feels comfortable writing, saying, Siesta Key, some of what we were talking about at dinner, y'all were talking about how you came to be here, right? It was, I moved to Siesta Key in, what'd you say, 91 with roses for my soon-to-be wife, right? And have been here ever since, and this church is important to my life, And then just finishes with, and that's why we have remembered this church in our estate plans. You don't have to say how much. You don't have to ask others to do it. You just say, I've done it. So that's a first person article. Or an obituary. Maybe somebody passed away recently, and you could write it like an obituary, you know. Jean went home, and then just finish with, you know, she remembered the church in her estate plans, right? So that's two examples. The third way is a technical article. Did you know that you could leave an estate gift through life insurance? Did you know that it's easy to do that? You just update the beneficiary form on your life insurance policy to include, 40% to your first child, 40% to your second child, and 20% to the church, however you want to do that, right? Like it's a technical article. So that's what the newsletter articles look like. 2 announcements, it's those first person articles. It's that first person testimonial. This is where you would want to coordinate with the generosity team, right? For that scheduling. And then that Legacy Sunday we talked about already. I did that really quick, but I hope I hit the high points and you caught them. I've got examples of this. What I would encourage you to do as a session is to form a small task force and ask them to maybe piece all this together in your context, put a brochure together, make sure your policies are lined up, all of that, and then bring all of that kind of packaged back to the session to roll out. And I would be happy to work with that task force to kind of help move that along. But this, remember I said drip, drip, drip. The key here really is just, you got to stay in front of people. Because the reality is, most people don't just run out and update their estate plans. So you can't just communicate about it once. You got to communicate about it a lot, so that when that person does go, you're right here on their mind. And they go, oh, the church is wanting me to do this, right? So that's what we're trying to do here with this. That was really quick. What questions or thoughts do you have on that? Or on anything?
I just wanted to say, this always seemed like.
You get your generosity team going. I'd love to come and meet with them and kind of kick that off and get them going and get the task force going on this. I'm happy to help. And then I do particularly on planned giving, I do a workshop that is intended to invite church members to leave their legacy. And so it's less telling you how to build a program. It's more, hey, why would I leave my legacy? So it's that sales pitch to them. And I'm happy to come and do that as well.
So you understand that Robert has committed to walking alongside us through these processes, and we are so grateful. 7 o'clock?
I did it.
You did it. Well done.
I made it.
To let you all head home.